Wolfrider, Part 3. With a feeling of helplessness, Andy paced the apartment. He looked for food but found nothing to satisfy an appetite he didn't have. He searched closets without knowing what he sought. He thought of rearranging his room only to give it up. Was it in any way possible? Could he get Lucas to help? Andy sat down and tried to think it through. What if he could force Lucas into the open by letting him know someone had discovered the truth? A kind of blackmail. Not really blackmail, Andy quickly told himself. No money was involved. Nothing like that. No, Lucas would pay by being Zeke in public. Andy tried to find a flaw, a catch. He couldn't. On the contrary, the more he considered the idea, the greater the possibilities grew, the more certain he became that he'd stumbled on the solution to his problem. After all, he told himself, he knew who Zeke was, but Lucas knew nothing of him. From perfect safety, by phone, he could pressure Lucas. Lucas would act while he, Andy, kept his distance, a safe distance, and he wouldn't be getting involved, just what he'd promised his father. In fact, all he needed to do was decide with whom he wanted Lucas to be Zeke. For the first time since he had his idea, Andy hesitated. The obvious person was Nina. If she complained when Andy did nothing, she'd really scream when Lucas talked to her. People would have to believe her. But wasn't that risky? He asked himself. Once more he felt the pressure of time. It was the only way, the fastest way, the way that would, in the end, protect Nina best. Andy went into his father's room, opened the college phone book, and looked up Lucas's number and wrote it down. Then he brought the phone into his own room and carefully shut the door and locked it. But after putting the phone on his desk, he felt a loss of nerve. Do it, he kept telling himself. Do it. It's the only way. Slowly, heart hammering, conscious of his fear, but at the same time telling himself he would be a coward not to act, that there was no time to do anything else, that he had to protect people from Lucas, that he wouldn't be involved, that it was his last chance, he pressed the correct numbers with a trembling hand and held the phone to his ear. Hello? Andy recognized Lucas instantly. That you? Zeke? He said. Lucas gave a sharp intake of breath. To Andy, it was the unmistakable sound of being discovered. Louder, bolder, he said, It is you, Zeke, isn't it? Lucas hung up. Andy stayed by his phone, his excitement growing. A great weight seemed to roll off of him. Sending his chair crashing, he leaped into the air as if spearing a line drive. At last he had done something right. As far as he was concerned, there was not the slightest doubt. Lucas's reaction was proof that he was vulnerable. He got me into this mess, Andy said to himself with a sense of triumph, and he's going to get me out. Lucas closed his eyes and allowed himself to breathe deeply, even as he pressed his hands together to stop their shaking. When he opened his eyes, nothing had changed. Shelves of neat, dust-free books stood against one wall. The multi-pane bay window overlooked a smooth green lawn. The wooden paneling, which covered another wall and bore the antique prints of birds, remained as solid as ever. His stack of mail, opened and unopened, lay before him in neat piles, the dagger-like letter opener near at hand on the desk, the clock radio in the center, the white dial phone on his right. It was the phone that had betrayed him. Coincidence, he whispered, berating himself for hanging up so abruptly. Composing himself, he sat up, adjusted his necktie, picked up his letter opener, shifted his eyeglasses, and selected the next letter. With a deft flick of his wrist, he slit the envelope open. It cut across the silence like a muted scream. Andy was thinking ferociously. Now convinced he would have no problem getting Lucas to talk to Nina directly, he realized he needed to know how she organized her day, where she went, what she did. Only then could he make sure Lucas met and talked to her at a particular time and place. The best time, the best place. And perhaps, Andy thought, he could get other people to listen. That would be for later. Nina's schedule was first. Andy biked to the college. In the library, he quickly checked the magazine section. An unfamiliar student was behind the desk, sorting volumes. Andy said, Is Nina Clemmer around? Ready to bolt if she was. Not yet. Andy relaxed. I need to get her work hours. Got her schedule? The student brought out a loose-leaf binder and put it on the counter. It's in there, she explained. Since the schedules were listed alphabetically by names, Nina was easy to find. Want to show me how to read this? Andy asked. The student was glad to help. See, she works Mondays through Fridays, 4 till 8. She'll be here soon. What's this on Monday? Andy said, taking a quick glance at the clock. The student checked the form. Oh, right. On Monday she leaves at 6. Has a night class in the old chapel. Andy took one of the magazine request forms and wrote down all the information, then left with a quick thanks. It had been so easy. Now all he needed was the rest of her schedule. At dinner that night, neither Andy nor his father mentioned Andy's going away. Instead, they talked about sports, the weather, some of Dr. Zadinsky's students. At one point, Andy asked, "How many courses do students have to take?" "At least 4," his father replied, "but most take 5. How come you're interested?" "Just curious." Later that evening, Andy heard his father talking to Peggy on the phone. "Andy's much better. It's almost as if he's glad to be leaving. Like he wanted me to step in and put a stop to it all. I'm relieved." Softly, Andy shut the door to his bedroom, sure that his father had no notion of what he was doing. Around 10, Sally called. "Hi, Andy," she said. "Oh, hi. Haven't seen you around much," she said. "Where you been?" "Just busy." "Paul said you were going away. That true?" "Yeah, well, maybe." "How come?" Andy said nothing. "Andy?" "What? Do you want to talk about it?" "No, that's okay." "Why?" "It's too complicated to explain. I have to do this alone." "Do what?" Again, Andy said nothing. "I just thought I'd call," said Sally. "Well, thanks. When you going?" "Week or so, except—" "What?" "Maybe I won't go." She waited for him to say more, then gave up. "See you," she said. "See you." Andy was tempted to call her back, swear her to secrecy, and tell her about his plan. It might be good to test it on someone, to make sure he wasn't overlooking anything. But just as quickly as he thought, "This is my show. It has to be mine alone." The next morning Andy got up half hour before his usual time, dressed quickly, and was just finishing breakfast when his father appeared. "You are up early," his father said. "Early student council meeting," Andy explained. "Meeting's at 8?" murmured Dr. Zadinsky with a shake of his head. He set about making his coffee. "See you later," Andy called from the door. "Right." Dr. Zadinsky turned to watch him go, pleased with Andy's renewed interest in school. Instead, Andy went to the college. He was not absolutely sure about the daily schedule, but assumed it wasn't that different from high school. Sometimes his father taught an 8 o'clock class, so he knew when the day began. He was aware that college students didn't go to classes every hour and on some days had no classes at all. He hoped that Fridays weren't such days for Nina. He reached Wig Hall where Nina lived at 7:30 and easily found a place close to the main door where he would not be noticed, but where he could see anyone who came out. At 10 minutes to 8, he noticed a sudden increase in the number of students emerging from the building. They all looked sleepy, and several ate as they walked. Nina was not one of them. Andy took a book from his bag and settled down for a long wait. Shortly before 9, there was another rush of students, and this time Nina appeared, dressed in her usual bright colors, a red dress with high, black boots. She walked briskly. As soon as Andy saw her, he dipped his head into his book, but once she passed, he rose and followed. Nina crossed the campus and went into one of the smaller buildings outside of which was a sign, Johnson School of Arts. Keeping a safe distance, Andy watched her go into a classroom, then strolled casually by the door and took a quick look inside. It was a large room filled with easels, and someone was talking about color. Finding himself a place in the hallway from which he could see the classroom door, Andy waited. By 2:30 that afternoon, he had determined 3 of Nina's classes. Even knew her lunch hour. She took it in the crowded student center and never noticed that Andy was 3 tables away. As he sat there, he felt almost a delicious sense of glee. He thought of his father calling him Sherlock, and rather liked the idea now. Maybe he was more like Spider-Man, or rather Peter Parker, watching out for the pretty girl across the way. He was having fun. Nina strolled across the campus, and Andy kept 12 yards behind, wishing he had a trench coat with a collar to turn up. Then he saw she was heading for Brazel Hall. He stopped, suddenly serious again. The last thing he wanted was a run-in with his father. Just in case, he thought up a story about needing a permission slip, then hurried to catch up. Nina went directly to the 3rd floor, where Dr. Zadinsky had his office and where he often taught. Andy kept after her, praying his father wouldn't appear, and when Nina entered a classroom, he again took a place that allowed him to see where she came out. A few moments before class time, Lucas came down the hallway. He passed in front of Andy before entering the same room. Nina was one of his students. I should have guessed, Andy thought to himself, delighted with his discovery. All the same, he felt it was too risky to stay in the building. He got out fast. Feeling a pang of hunger, he slipped into Minkoff Hall and got a candy bar from a vending machine. Then he positioned himself so he could observe both the entrance to the hall and the library. A little more than an hour later, Andy watched as Nina emerged from the classroom building and went into the library, going, as he knew, to her job. He had found out her entire schedule. Given the time left, he saw only one choice. Nina had an evening class on Monday night, which went from 7 until 9 and met in the old chapel. It was then and there that Andy had to get Lucas to speak to her. For a moment, Andy thought of going too, just as quickly as he realized that would be foolish. It was important for him to keep his distance. Let her hear, on her own, what Lucas had to say. With a growing sense of excitement and urgency, he decided he'd better start prodding Lucas. He hurried to the student center, found a payphone, and in moments was put through to the math department. "Hello?" came Lucas's voice. "Zeke," said Andy. "That you?" "I think you have the—" "Nina Clemmer," Andy cut in. After a moment of silence, he said, "You there, Zeke? This is a message to Zeke from Nina. She wants to meet you." "Who is this?" "Don't you want to meet her?" said Andy, and worried that he might laugh, hung up. As he left the student center, he reminded himself that he needed to be free of his father the next day so he could call Lucas again. In his office, Lucas leaned against the door, preventing anyone from entering. In a sudden rage, he grasped the phone and hurled it against the wall. The phone casing shattered into small, jagged pieces. When Andy reached home, his father was waiting for him. "How about a movie after dinner?" he offered. "Suits me," said Andy, wondering if his father detected any difference in him. He felt different.